Hey guys, Ray Russell here from WrestleCopia.com, inviting everybody to check out this bonus edition of the Regional Wrestling Podcast. Now, for those of you who are unaware, we do have another podcast along with wrestling legend Bob Roop called The Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop. And over there, we've been discussing the era of the 1970s, the 1980s, into 1990, in fact, when Bob worked for WCW behind the scenes in the ring. So many of the great talents and characters that Bob encountered along the way. Lots of great stories each and every week over there on the Wrestling Stoop. But last week, we just kicked off Bob's time in Georgia Championship Wrestling when Bob arrived in 1983. And he's going to remain there for over 2.5 years until after the Crockett takeover on TBS. And so we got such great feedback on that first episode involving the Georgia territory. We went back, read a few excerpts from Ole Anderson's book. Of course, for those who don't know, Bob wasn't just a wrestler in Georgia, but he also worked as Ole's right-hand man, his number one guy, his agent, if you will, there. And so Bob has tons of great behind-the-scenes stories to tell. And we kicked it off last week. Again, lots of great feedback from the listeners out there of the Wrestling Stoop. I appreciate them very much. For those of you who haven't heard the episode yet, we're going to play it here as part of Regional Wrestling in a bonus edition, because for those who haven't been on social media or haven't listened to some of the other podcasts that we put out, unfortunately, my family was recently stricken with COVID. The entire lot of us. Yes, guys. So all 7 kids that still remain here, as well as me and my wife, pretty much everybody's recovered by this point. I know I sound pretty okay. The energy level goes up and down, though. So that's the key factor here this week, is trying to get my energy back to full go. I feel like by next week, we're going to be ready. We're going to be right back into things. But this week, I didn't want the show to lay dormant, so I figured, why not put out an episode or two of bonus content from some of the other shows here on the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, just in case you're not aware they exist, or maybe because you just haven't given them a try yet, and you want your fix of regional wrestling. Well, it doesn't get more territorial than Georgia Championship Wrestling. We're going to head back right now, guys. Last week's episode of the Wrestling Stoop. Be on the lookout this Thursday. Another edition of the Stoop going to drop as we continue to talk more Georgia Championship Wrestling, more great stories. But right now, we're going to go back in time. 1983, Bob's leaving the Mid-South Territory, popping up here for Georgia Championship Wrestling. We're going to talk tons of stories, great stories, behind-the-scenes stories about Ole Anderson, the promotion, many of the talents involved, Buzz Sawyer, Tommy Rich, the list goes on. So hang tight, guys. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode of the Regional Wrestling Podcast, of course, where we talk the territories. But for right now, going to send you back in time to last week, an encore presentation of the Wrestling Stoop, a bonus episode here on the Regional Wrestling Podcast, going back to 1983 in Georgia Championship Wrestling. Guys, and welcome back to another edition of the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. And I am your co-host, Ray Russell, along for the ride once again as we begin to head into Georgia Championship Wrestling. Bob's run there, his time there, circa 1983, all the way into 1985. And for those of you who may be wondering, Ray, you sound a little different this week. Well, I have been under the weather. In fact, the COVID virus has went through the entire house over the last week and a half. And I, for one, got the brunt of it. Luckily, the kids recovered fairly quickly, the ones that actually had any symptoms at all. My wife, she had a little more, but a hell of a trooper, and she's getting better, I'm happy to say. And actually, I'm doing better because I'm actually on the air as well, guys. And I've made a few updates across my social media over the last weeks just to kind of give everybody an idea what's going on. But for those of you who didn't have social media, I wanted to cover that up front here. So if I sound a little lethargic, to quote Gorilla Monsoon, or maybe my voice is a little off, you guys know why. I'm still recovering, but I did want to try to get at least a couple shows out this week, this being one of them, one of my all-time favorites to do each and every time out. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show, the man, the myth, the legend, the one and only Bob Roop.
Well, thank you, Ray, and it's good to be back. Hi out there to all our listeners. Happy New Year's already passed. I hope the year is going well for folks. And here in Michigan, we have 3 great seasons. and then we have winter, which is not always that great, but the other three seasons of the year more than make up for it. So anyway, Ray, I'm sorry to hear that you were under the weather, and I'm really glad you recovered enough to, well, not just to do our thing, but you recovered enough to feel human again.
Yeah.
So, well, welcome. I welcome you back, the land of the healthy, my friend.
The land of the living. Anyway, I feel.
Yeah.
I feel okay that I can sit up here and talk into a microphone for a while. So that's what we're going to do here this week. If I can only get a couple shows in, this is definitely one of the ones I wanted to do. And I've been excited since we last talked, Bob, because I knew we were heading into Georgia Championship Wrestling, which was huge. It was on cable, Superstation 17, WTBS, and Ole Anderson's booking at that time when you come in there. But before we get there, we're going to go back, actually, because you're going to arrive in the early part of 83 into Georgia. But before you do that, we've talked about it in the past. You finish up working for the Cowboy, Bill Watts, in the Mid-South Territory right around your birthday in July of 1982. And I notice after that, and it doesn't take much to notice, just go look up the results and look up Bob Roop, and you notice that your name disappears from wrestling, the business as a whole, say from August all the way through January of 1983. And so I asked you off air, Bob, do you remember what was that long hiatus, what that was about? And we talked a little bit about it off air, but I want you to share with everybody what transpired between that time period.
Okay, well, yeah, I had been finishing up with Bill, and I got one of those just absolutely dreaded phone calls from my younger sister, that my dad was critical. I had not even known, in fact, they didn't either know that he was sick, as he was as sick as he was. And within probably an hour, it was difficult to fly out of Alexandria, Louisiana. So I jumped in my car. I kind of panicked. I jumped in my vehicle and started driving for Michigan, I don't know, 1,000 miles or so, as fast as I could. By the time I got there, my dad had passed. And man, what a blow. I didn't get a chance to say goodbye, which is can be really traumatic. It bothers me to this day. But anyway, as shocked and remorsed as I was, imagine how my mother felt. She didn't know that she knew that there was something wrong with him, but they had been to the doctor several times, and the doctor ended up having to face a malpractice charge for what happened. But as a result, my dad died of cancer that he had for I don't know how many years. That the doctor never discovered. It started in his prostate, and the doctor didn't do the kind of exams that were necessary to detect it. So anyway, my mother just fell apart. Everything in their home reminded her of her husband of half century, and so she didn't go crazy in the sense of actually like pathologically, clinically. But she just wanted to she started getting rid of everything that reminded her of him. And my brother was hauling truckloads of stuff to the dump of mementos, and including like 1,000 books they had bought and saved, and just all kinds of things. And when I got on the scene, of course, I was up there for his memorial. Later on, he had asked to be buried at Arlington National Cemetery, and his lifetime in the military enabled him to do that. So we all went down there a month or two later. He was cremated, and then we took his remains to Arlington. But my mother was just, she didn't have a breakdown, but she was really, really, really upset, of course. And so I stuck around. I basically finished up with Bill. It wouldn't have mattered if I was booked in the main event against the world champion at the Omni. I would have still been up there taking care of my dad or my mom's affairs. So I just stayed up there, and it took me about 6 months to get his affairs kind of put in order. My wife was still in Alexandria, Louisiana, going to nursing school. And so after I finished getting my dad's affairs in order and getting my mom kind of, used to her new life, I went back to Louisiana. And by the time I already knew I was going to be going to Atlanta. So I'd worked a few shows for Bill. I don't know. I don't remember exactly how that worked. I called him and he said, well, I'll go ahead and book you or something. But anyway, that was the way that worked out. That I ended up going back to Louisiana just for a couple of shows. And then it was on to Atlanta.
Okay, so you're basically supposed to finish up with Bill in July. Well, actually, it was before that, but we've told that story about the Orndorff situation, jobbing to the dog. You got a couple extra months out of that, and you wind up working through right around your birthday time there in July of '82. Your father passes away, I guess, shortly thereafter. You're dealing with things at home, totally understandable, making sure mom's okay, and very commendable. Again, terrible guy who tried to steal Knoxville territory, making sure his family's doing well. And so we do see your name pop up here. It's funny you said that. In November of '82, you return to Mid-South Wrestling TV. You do a squash match. You go over on Mike Bond. So even in returning, Bill's using you, even on the house show here in New Orleans, November 25th, Bob Roop beats King Cobra. And you also work wrestling, too, in Baton Rouge a few days later. So you do have a few dates here in November of '82. I guess you're back there hanging out with the honey, and you're back in the area. Maybe you said, Bill, I could use a couple bucks. I don't know how that went, but the Cowboy put you back on a few shows anyway, and he's putting you over for the most part. So clearly Watts certainly respected your talents, because if a guy's coming in for a week or two, usually he's not going to be getting too many wins. And he's even using you on TV.
Curious, I'm thinking back, I don't remember exactly why he did it that way. Maybe he planned, if he could, to bring me in, or to bring me, you know what? Sure. You know what it might be? It might be he was planning on asking me. You never stay in one area too long. Maybe he was thought maybe in a year or two he'd have me come back. That was a way to to have me go out. Although they do that with a lot of people. They know they're going to come back in a year or two. They still have them do jobs before they leave. Before they leave the first time, because it's not going to hurt them, and you get back some of what you put into them in terms of their stature. Mm-hmm. You put that stature on someone else. So I'm really actually a little bit surprised to hear that to learn from you that I was going over in those matches. There's not really much you can say about Watts in terms of his booking ability. Ole was the best I ever met, but Watts was right up there with him. Well, I mean, let's look at who did they hire to run the company once Turner bought it, wasn't it? Didn't he hire Bill?
Bill came in '92 after they went through a slew of other people that didn't work out. So Bill had his run there as well. But that was the end of wrestlers running the company after Bill Watts had got a hold of it there.
Hurd hired?
Jim Hurd did come in when Turner bought it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the Cowboy and Ole Anderson, because while I was down and out, while I was laid up on the couch, I did a lot of reading through Ole's book, which I'd read back when it came out, but it's been so long. What a great read. I encourage anybody that can get a hold of Ole Anderson's autobiography to go out there and check it out. It's really fun stuff. Very detailed, great memories, and for as angry and gruff as he was, he still made a lot of it into humor. So it's a really good read and really educational on the history of the business, because Ole was deep in that. And he gave credit to Cowboy for many things, which I'm sure we're going to be discussing as we go along here in Georgia. You talked about it last time out. Bill was the one that came up with the idea of the look for the Road Warriors, paint their faces and get them over that way, fun, if you will. And so that worked. But Ole also credits Bill as the guy who looked into the numbers of how many people had cable in certain cities. It was Bill's idea for Ole. Why don't you go expand into Ohio? I was up there in Columbus, the area, they do such big numbers in cable. The fans there in the area have cable TV. Take advantage of that. Go run Columbus, which is what Ole starts to do as the Cowboy leaves, because Bill Watts comes in and books Georgia for a while in '80. In the summer, the end of the summer of 1980, Ole Anderson takes back over. The Cowboy leaves to go make sure he's going to go take off with Mid-South Wrestling at that time. And so that was just one of the ideas he gave Ole, and Ole ran with it, and obviously it worked out.
Oh yeah. When I ended up going over to Atlanta, they had just come back from a week in Ohio where I think Columbus did $50,000.
Right.
Which was I think that's the highest it ever.
That was a peak number, but it was often sold out, so that was very common.
Yeah, and so that's just one town. They had they had a bunch of towns in Ohio that had over 100,000 population. I used to say 1,000,000 before, which is just stupid. I don't know why, but over 100,000. I mean, like in Michigan, you got Detroit, there's a major metropolis, and then a bunch of smaller cities. Even Lansing, I think Lansing's got maybe 150,000, but you don't have a lot of big cities. In Ohio, they had 8 or 9, with Columbus and Cleveland. Cleveland's another major, like a Detroit, and Columbus and, Cincinnati and Toledo and Akron and all these places that you could go and have. They had good arenas. They didn't have. We were talking about in a former show about working with the Papos and going from TV to some places where would seat like 300 people.
Right.
With in Ohio. You go up there and you might work every night. You'd work a major arena or building of some sort, and that was heady times. It was, you talk about doing big business. And the other thing was that I didn't realize actually in full until you brought it up a minute ago. I didn't realize the area hadn't been running for a while. I didn't know the time span from when Ole had started to run it. I didn't realize it had been just recently that he had started running Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
But
because Ole was smart. He went in and just ran Columbus from, I think it was October of 1980, and all of 1981 was just Columbus. He expanded immediately at the beginning of 82, however, and even the smaller towns like a Zanesville. So Ole took his time to get in there, and he waited and to see where the cable was going to spread into the big cities, and got himself TV in those big cities before he ran there, which was intelligent. He talked about, and we're probably going to get to it. I have so many excerpts I grabbed from Ole's book talking about Georgia, talking about you, and we haven't gotten to it yet, obviously, but there's a point where he talks about, we were on TV in Cleveland for 3 months before we ran there to get the fans acclimated with the promotion. And that was just, genius. It's like, well, let's not just run a show. Let's give the people time to start watching and figuring out what time this show's on and who these talents are. And then we'll run. And then, of course, it was off to the races. And we're going to talk about the gates that you guys were doing in Ohio.
Looking back, Ole was a student of the profession. He went to school over, from the beginning. He was studying how to reach the very top, and the very top not making the most money. One way to do it. I mean, you can talk all you want about being the world champion and making, 300 or 400 grand a year, but then you talk about being, say, a Jim Crockett and making $3 or $4 million a year. Talking about 100, many times percentage higher.
Right.
And that's what he wanted to do was to be an owner. He'd been a booker, to be an owner, and to able to, like Barnett, we talked about on another program, Mike Barnett, when the money comes back, he got his hands on it first. That's the person who makes the most money, the one who gets their hands on it first. And I'm not saying anything about stealing or anything nefarious or untoward, but
well, Ole does in his book in regards to Jim Barnett, and we will get to that eventually.
Okay. Well, anyway, he was, he wasn't Ole wasn't a drinker or a druggie, or my understanding was that he'd go on a long trip, like 300 miles each way. He would take a soda. He would take a soda in a cooler, like a can of pop, and Bob Orton and I might have a case of beer. And, if it was Andre was there, you had 3 or 4, maybe a keg. But he was very frugal. That's why he ended up with money. He didn't waste it. He invested his money. He didn't put it into Slim Jims and cases of beer. So, very smart guy.
So you talked about it. You already knew at least a couple months in advance that you were going to be heading to Georgia, and you're going to show up there on Atlanta TV, February 5th. I don't have any results, and I haven't gotten there and looking at the matches. So I'm assuming you just arrived on that taping and did a promo, is my guess, to set up your actual debut or your return to the territory, whichever way you want to look at it. It's been a long time. And so on February 6th in the Omni in Atlanta, brother, Bob Roop defeats Brad Armstrong February 6th, 1983, your first match back in Georgia in quite a spell. And Brad Armstrong had actually come into the company, Georgia, in the fall of 1981. He came in, immediately won the national tag team titles in the Thanksgiving night tournament with his father, the Bullet, Bob Armstrong. So Brad had been around. He was very young, very green, but even then you could see he was a natural in the ring. He was very good for his age and the length of time he had been in the business. But Brad would go on with Bob to feud with Roddy Piper right out of the gate, Roddy's first real feud in the Georgia territory at the beginning of 1982. And so the fans here in Georgia knew Brad, but he was still young. He was still up and coming to a degree, if you will. And here comes this guy, Bob Roop, out of the blue, right there on Georgia TV. He talked his game the day before, and the following night, scoring a win over Brad Armstrong. Do you have any memories of arriving in Georgia?
Yeah, I do, but not. I remember I drove to Alexandria, Louisiana, and did those shows with Bill. I remember loading up. I had a home gym, one of those things that you can put together and it take the corner of the room. I never used it when I had it in Alexandria. For some reason, I loaded it into my vehicle and I drove it to Atlanta, and they had a rooming house there in Atlanta that all the boys stayed at. It's $42 a week. One of the reasons it was so cheap was that it was a nice enough place. It was like an old inn or hotel that it wasn't run down, but it was old, and it was all wood. It wasn't metal or brick or anything. A bunch of the boys stayed there. Again, the $42 a week. Well, every other week you were gone for a week, so you were paying for that week without even being there. But still, financially, it worked out okay. But I knew I was going to have a place that I could put this gym that I brought. I got hooked up and got a room there. And the first night, I realized why it was so cheap, because there was a train station about a block away with trains going through all the time. And then the hotel was right under the main runway from Hartwell Airport, and the planes were taking off.
It's like an old sitcom, right?
Yeah. And the first night I thought, well, I'm never going to be able to sleep in this place. But by about a week later, I was laying there and I thought, wait a minute, why don't I hear the planes and the train? And once I tried to listen, I did hear them. What happens is you learn to shut that stuff out, and where you can go ahead and, just ignore it and whatever. But going in there, I went in there to work as a wrestler. Only man hadn't talked about me working in the office, but
right.
What happened was, and we've talked about this before, but for some reason, to this day, I still don't know why, but Buck Robley came to me, and he brought Bruiser Bodie with him when he did, and he talked to me about, and I hadn't seen Buck in years and years. He talked to me about going opposition to Ole. I told Buck, I said, no, I'm not interested in doing that. Now, if he had asked me to keep it to myself, I'm not sure what I would have done. I felt obligated. So Robley, if he's ever doing a show like this, he's probably talking about me like he probably talked about me like I talked about Slater. But just I didn't ever give Robley any idea at all that I was going to have anything to do with it. I told him at the time I thought he was mistaken, that there wasn't a chance. I said, do you have a TV? He said, no. I said, well, what do you think, they're going to get TBS? He said, well, that's the plan. I said, well, I'm not interested. So I told Ole. I felt obligated to tell him because, he's my employer. It's my job, and I want to keep it. So I told him. I've told this story, too, before. I didn't feel like a snitch or a tattletale. If Robley had asked me to keep it to myself, I'm still not sure what I would have said. But Ole had hired me. And here's another thing. I respected Ole. And there weren't many. I didn't respect Buck Robley. And, Brody I respected, but mainly for his wrestling prowess, not for any management. Here you had Ole, who could do everything in the business. He could work, he could run it, he had all these qualities that I didn't have yet. I had some of them, but that I admired tremendously. And guys like Buck Robley, not to knock Buck, Buck had a lot of things going for him, but he wasn't within 100 yards of anything Ole Anderson could do, because he just didn't have the brains for it, or the experience. Anyway, I ended up seeing, after Ole talked to Buck and fired him, I knew Buck and Brody was always hanging with him. I knew they would be at the bar that night, and I went to the bar and I walked up to him, and he was looking daggers at me, and he said, "Well, Bobby, I thought you were one of the boys," and I said, "Well," being one of the boys is what you are after you have your first match. I said, "I've been around for a while," and I said, "Buck, you know something? You really need to learn the business if you're going to try to do what you're thinking about trying to do. You don't know the business by thinking about trying." Because I had two examples with Shire and with Ron Fuller. I had two examples of how to really screw up and make a mistake of doing exactly what Buck Robley was trying to do. And I knew never to try it again unless I had somebody like, say, Ole Anderson decide he wanted to try it. And he was going to take over and start. We ended up having to do that anyway once Crockett bought him out. But if Ole had tried it, that would have been different, because then I could have seen, he would sit down and explain to me how he was going to make it work. Robley I don't know what Robley was thinking. He never gave me any plan. I asked him, "You got TV?" Well, as soon as he said no, I said, "Well, you don't have a chance." I mean, I saw Robley years later, and he shook my hand. He didn't seem to be upset about it. I remember in the bar, I wasn't worried really, although maybe I should have been, but Robley's talking to me at the bar, and he's between me and Brody. Brody's up like a head higher than Robley, and he's looking at me over Robley's shoulder, and he's just glaring at me, man. He's got that Brewster Brody look like he's just getting ready to attack somebody like Abdullah the Butcher in Japan. And he's got that look like he was chew my face off. Well, I certainly took note of it, but I wasn't too worried. I had all kinds of weapons there around me with beer mugs, and the best thing to do in a bar if you're getting in a fight is jump over the bar, because right behind the bar there's all kinds of things, knives and corkscrews.
Who knows what they got back underneath that thing anyway?
Yes, maybe a shotgun
or two. Yeah, you never know.
That's the place. Oh, yeah. If you're going to get in a fight in a bar, jump over the bar.
Well, here's the thing with that, too. If anybody goes and digs into this, you arrive on February 5th. Buck Robley arrives right around the same time. Bruiser Brody is there at the end of January. And this story pans out. But not that I would accuse you of making this up anyway, but you're basically all there right around the same time frame. And Brody had been there multiple times. Robley had been there before. It wasn't like this was their first rodeo in Georgia, but everybody gets together right around this time. You just show up in February. Robley and Brody are essentially gone at the same exact time right around the end of February. So that would mean you were in the company less than a month before you were approached to run opposition. That is insane that you just show up and immediately he's kind of looking into, hey, Bob, how would you like to go and try to run some opposition to Georgia Championship Wrestling, which of all the territories at the time, that's kind of crazy, right? You're running against the company that has cable TV.
You know what just occurred to me? My background, the fact that I had done with just come from, trying against Fuller. Now, a year had gone by where I'd been at Mid-South, but I had that in my background of going opposite. I mean, the boys all knew about everything that happened out there in California and with Ron Fuller out there in Knoxville. And Robley thought that maybe, I had that kind of a makeup in my genes that I wanted to, just go opposition, whenever the case applied itself. But the reason that I told him about you need to learn the business was that when I asked him about his preparation for going opposition, he didn't have any. What he had was him and Brody and two or three. I think he said Ted DiBiase was going to go with him. I don't know, Ted. I'm sorry. I'm not sure that's true. Maybe he thought it was, but he was talking about having these guys go with him. I kept coming back. Have you got TV locked up? And when he kept saying no, I said, well, And another thing I meant about when I told him you need to learn the business, he never should have approached me without feeling me out first, getting some kind of idea like, hypothetically, Bob, what would you think about this? I said, I would have told him, no, I've learned my lesson. I'm never going opposition again unless I got the multi-millionaire behind me owns a TV station. Ted Turner, for example, who only happens to have behind him. Yeah, but no, he never sounded me out or anything. Which again, that's another thing I meant about you need to learn this business. You can't trust anybody in this business. Telephone, tell a wrestler. You can't trust people. And it doesn't mean that people in the business lack character. What it means is it's a business that individuals are looking out for themselves. You're not looking out for the other guy. You're not looking out for your tag team partner unless it's because what affects your partner affects you too. That's the only reason you're looking out for them, because you have to worry about your own career. And so knowing that, yeah, the Buck approached me without feeling me out first, just having a beer to, get together 2 or 3 times and saying, well, what would you think about this or that? He would have known right away. Instead, he just he gave up what he was doing to somebody who was, I felt loyalty. First of all, I respected the hell out of Ole. Always did. I always respected Ole. From the time I first met him, I was a little intimidated by Ole. Not that I didn't worry. I was worried about being able to beat him. But he's one of those guys, if it was one-on-one, just me and him, that's always the last scenario you have to face or do if I have to fight this guy. But I knew that even if I could beat him, which I knew he had some wrestling background, I knew I was going to get hurt. And if you get into a fight knowing you're going to get hurt, you're out of your mind. Find out some other way to do it. Wait a few years and run him over with a car or something. I mean, if you gotta get somebody, well, don't get into a fight where you're going to end up, getting an eye put out or thumb ripped off or your nose ripped off or ear bitten off or something like that. So I respected, but that wasn't why I respected Ole. That was part of it. He was a stand-up tough guy, but he was smart. He started about the same time I did. Look where he was compared to where I was. No, he was in there before I was, but still, he had progressed to the very top. Right. He was running the one cable station in the country. He was that had wrestling. He was running it. So how could you not respect a guy that's one of your peers? He had the same background. We found out that we're very similar in age. We both did 3 years in the service in the Army. We both went to school. We both wrestled in college. But look where he had come as opposed to where I had come. I'm coming to work for him at his discretion, however he wanted to use me. Now, if he did, just wanted to make me referee or something, I would have left. But, you never know. Yeah, so I respected Ole. And frankly, once Buck came to me and made the opposition, I didn't respect him anymore. If I ever did. I liked him, but I don't know about respect.
Yeah. And in wrestling, those are definitely even further apart than they are in other parts of life, for sure.
Yes.
I totally get it. And that's what Ole's book is all about. He tries to give everybody an understanding of everything was business. And he even talks about when Vince came to him and said, it's just business, Ole, that he was on the other side of the coin and he didn't like it too much. Yes. He didn't understand it at the time. It pissed him off. Fuck you, it's business. But at the same time, Ole admits that that's what I said to all these other guys. Like, he's totally open and honest. He talks about the guys that he really liked, but it was business and they weren't getting over or they didn't have it and he had to fire them. And it was no personal, deal. Maybe they did hold it, a grudge because it was their business. They were trying to make money. But yeah, we're going to talk a whole bunch about that. We've got so many excerpts here to go through. And I want to tell everybody right now, kick up your feet, take them shoes off and relax. And no matter where you are, drinking a cup of coffee, you need a bottle of water. Maybe you're having a beer, do whatever you got to do, because this time in Georgia, I don't know how long we're going to be here. We've got so many different ways to hit this, from Ole's books and shoot interviews he's done and his discussion of it, your memories, Bob. We're going to talk about all the talent that came through there while you were there. We're going to talk about some behind the scenes stories that many people may not know about as of yet. Maybe some you'll recall as I go through some of Ole's stories here as well. So we've got so many different angles to hit this with. I don't know how long we're going to be in Georgia. It's like the Twilight Zone. We're here, and I don't know how long we're going to be here, but I'm here for the entire duration because it's going to be a fun ride.
I am too. I'm looking forward to it. We're in it. I'm enjoying it. Yeah, those were heady memories because what we covered in the last year is like we started at the beginning of when I was still in college and getting ready to break in. We talked about my history before I actually started work as a pro wrestler. So we've come all the way now to a place where I've actually become knowledgeable about the wrestling business, through Hard Knocks and what happened with California and with Fuller. Not that those things, they didn't physically affect me too much, like mentally or psychologically or emotionally, but they affected my pocketbook. It cost me a lot of money. And Ole never made that mistake. He never did things that were going to cost him. He kept earning all along. He worked his way up step by step and piece by piece and promotion by promotion and TV by TV to where he wasn't ever going to be losing money. He was making more. And so he had the ability to have foresight and planning, which I didn't have. One thing, again, I respected the guy personally, and I liked him. He was straight. I wasn't one of those guys that wanted to rib everybody and horseshit wrestling talk to everybody that came along. I was more of a straight shooter myself. And not that anything wrong with that, but that just wasn't my shtick. I liked guys that would talk, were straight. When you come in, I saw Ole yesterday afternoon when I left the office to go to the show, and then I come in and see him. Now it's the next morning. When I come in, he just look up and say, "Hey, I didn't expect him. Hey, how you doing?" All that
like
crap.
He hadn't seen you in 6 months.
Or he might not even say, "Hey." He'd say, "Hey," he might say, "Look at these. Take these and go look at them and do something with this." They're like I just walked out the door, a half bit of 10 minutes ago, and now I'm just walking back in. I like that because there was no pressure. There was no pressure socially to have to you walking up to, why do people, when they walk up to other people, why do they stick a hand out? They want to make sure the other person doesn't have their hand on a gun or in their pocket where they pull out a knife or brass knucks or something. They want to see if the person's got an empty hand. That's the reason. That's the origin of the handshake. And so I'm glad I didn't want to have to shake Ole's hand every time I came in to see him.
Yeah.
So I appreciated that.
So I'm going to go into some excerpts here in Ole's book, and we're going to jump around from week to week and look into some comments that Ole's made. There's a lot to get into, but I highlighted some of the comments that he made about you specifically. So some of them are in regards to some of the work that you were doing behind the scenes and some other things. But first, we're actually going to go back in time. And Ole talked a little bit about some of the more grizzled veterans, the hookers, the stretchers that would be quote unquote hired, and I'm using that term loosely, to work out with what Ole calls the marks. And you're very familiar with that going back to the Eddie Graham days. And so Ole had a bit to say about that. He talked about some of the names that enjoyed doing that enjoyed hurting people, maiming people. But he also went on to say that Bob Roop, a former AAU champion, could beat a lot of people. Dale Lewis, a national champion, could also beat a lot of people, but both of them hated to hurt anyone. If they had a choice, they would choose not to hurt you. So a lot of people have the misconception, based on there's footage out there, Bob, I'm sure you've had to have seen it by now, of one particular, I will call him a mark, that you had to work out with down there in the Florida office. And that footage popped up maybe 10, 11 years ago on the WWE network as a hidden gem, I do believe. And it's got you in the ring. And as you used to say, Eddie Graham would stand ringside waiting to take his shot after the fact. And it had you working out with a young guy. And I don't know the backstory, but it appears that you were coached along to injure this guy. And his arm, something happened to his arm. I can't tell. I haven't seen it in like a decade. But something goes awry, and his arm is definitely popped out of place or broken or something along those lines. And as he leaves the ring, you actually are shouting negatively towards him. I don't know if that was provoked. I don't know if you remember this incident. I don't know if you've actually seen it. But I have to imagine you have.
Oh man, it's like a stain on my back, my reputation. I mean, I
Yeah.
look like just a total bully,
Hmm.
and without trying to seem apologetic or like making excuses, it's the furthest thing from the truth. By the time the guy walks out, he's been there at least 20 minutes, and the whole 20 minutes, in that 20-minute time limit, Eddie Graham had asked me, and he didn't say you better break his leg. He'd say break his leg or break his arm.
Hmm.
He had asked me to name this guy at least 20 times. I spent most of the time staying away from anywhere where Eddie could easily talk to me, where he could, talk in a low voice where the guy couldn't hear him,
Right.
because I didn't want to have to keep, because I wasn't going to do it. It was. I don't think it was on the video, but at one time I had him. I had his leg locked in a way that all I had to do was keep pulling on his leg. I had his leg hooked. He was laying flat on his face. Had his leg hooked with mine and pinned where it was pinned to the ground. I had his lower leg. It was bent at the knee, and I had his foot in my both my hands pulling up. If I had pulled his leg as hard as I could, I would have broken his ankle, his fibula, his tibia. I would have dislocated his knee and maybe broken. The only thing that would save his femur from being broken would be if his knee dislocated. If his knee didn't dislocate, I'd break his femur too with one move. And
Hmm.
that's what these horrible hooks are called. That's why they're
Right.
called hooks. Well, I did. I didn't want to bend the guy's leg, but I mean, break it. What I was doing when I pulled on it, his shin bone, you know how the shin bone, all you do is look down at your leg, folks. His shin bone was bent the wrong way. It was curved outward,
Mm.
like 5 degrees. And I mean, it made me sick looking at it. I had to let the guy go. I couldn't break it. Finally, what happened? He didn't have a broken arm. He had a wrist that may have been dislocated. It wasn't dislocated where the hand was turned another way. What I did is I cracked it. I heard it crack, and I threw him out of the ring. And I'd been trying to get rid of him for 20 minutes, and I'd thrown him out of the ring about 5 or 6 times. And Graham kept sweep talking him to get back in the ring. And
Hmm.
so finally I threw him out, and what it was Graham kept insisting that what could have ended it is if the guy would have admitted that he wasn't a pro wrestler, and he didn't want to do it because he'd been trained. What happened is a local fly-by-night type wrestler at a wrestling school
Hmm.
had trained this guy and sent him over to Championship Wrestling from Florida. And Eddie kept wanting to he wanted it on tape, on video, of this guy admitting that he wasn't a pro wrestler. And so the last time I threw him out of the ring, I said, "So, are you a pro wrestler or are you not a pro wrestler?" I wasn't going to break his arm or his leg. I was trying at least to get that part done because I was under such pressure from Graham. The guy said, "Oh well, I guess I'm not," and I lost it. I was under such stress from having this guy who, is like my mentor in the wrestling business, the guy that
Hmm.
started me, the guy that came up to Detroit at the amateur tournament and recruited me. Here's this guy telling me to do this thing. He's also the guy writing my paychecks. And so when the guy said, "Well, yes, and he started to walk out the front, like back into the dressing room where his clothes were, I knew that I knew Graham was going to get him back in there again. So when the guy said, "Yeah, I guess I'm not a wrestler," then he said it kind of a grudgy tone of voice.
Right.
I jumped out of the ring and I took him and I knocked him. I knocked him. There was a big a stand there that there was an elevated place for putting a TV camera, and it had like 4x4s and all four legs. It was probably 6 feet square, and it was about 4 or 5 feet off the ground where you could put a TV camera up there if you want to shoot from that angle. And I knocked him under there, and I was like, I pushed him under there, and because he was trying to go into the locker room. and I wanted to there was a door right next to it that led to the outside. So I got him, I kicked him in there. I pulled him out and threw him through the door out of the building and ran him down that alley and said, get out of here or stay out of here. And I went back and shut the door. That way I got rid of him. Well, about 10 minutes later, I was upstairs. I was working in the office. I came back. They called me. Said, come back down here. And I come back down here. They got this guy. The cops are there. They got this guy handcuffed. And he's back right inside the door. I threw him out of him about 15 minutes ago. Mm-hmm. He had run down to the, there was the sportatorium, Snake Pit, was about halfway up the block from a main street. And there was a store on the street facing the main street. This guy had run down half a block and around the corner. They run into the store. You go, help, help. And they thought he'd been in a car wreck. He had blotches all over him. I didn't beat him up. I didn't punch him, no break his nose or rip his ear or break a finger or anything. He had the wrist cracked. And I'm not sure it even needed a cast. I don't know. It might have been able to just put a kind of that walking splint on it and wrap it. But anyway, the cops, they called the police. And when the police came, the people in the flower store, I think it was, thought he had been in a car wreck. The cops knew what was going on at the Snake Pit. Eddie had invited them in a few times to watch the proceedings. Some of the cops enjoyed that kind of crap, seeing people get hurt. Mm-hmm. So they brought him back. So when I came down from upstairs, I see the guy back there again. I went, oh God! I said, get him out of here. Thank God Graham wasn't around. It had me check him on again. And I remember Dick Murdoch was there because Murdoch was in town. He didn't have anything to do. He always came down to the office to hang out and see what was going on. And he said to the guy, he said, hey, you wrestle at Bob Roop. My grandmother can beat Bob Roop. He said, why don't you take on a real man? Take me on. And the guy said, well, I got my hands handcuffed behind me. Murdoch said, don't give me those cheap excuses, you chicken shit bastard, you.
Man, Dick Murdoch was full of great lines, wasn't he?
Yeah, that was a great line. I mean, I had to laugh at that one, but yeah, that whole thing was...
You talk about that being a stain because literally that's the only context we have for any of the stretching you did with all these marks that would come in there. And you've talked about what Eddie had you do, but the stories are out there beyond you, Bob, of what he had. Even Jack Brisco at times, he wasn't even able to escape this type of activity because there were rumors or there were reports that even, I think Jerry might have even told the story that he would make Jack get in there and do that every once in a great while. And so you figure, wait a minute, NWA world champion Jack Brisco, and I don't know that he had been champion by that point yet, but still you see this guy's being groomed for a world championship run down the line, and he's still being encouraged to go in there and just go stretch and perhaps maim these marks who want to try to break into the business. And people go, well, why did Bob do it? He could have just quit. In fact, one time I watched a podcast or a quick video clip of Dutch Mantell watching the footage of you doing that, and with no context, Dutch just said, why did you do that, Bob? Why didn't you just walk out of the ring? And really, yeah, I guess at the end of the day, you had that option, but really none of you guys really had that option. You guys were kind of like forced into it, really. I mean, whether there was a physical gun to your head or not. No. There was a multitude of guys that were forced into it. You guys really didn't have much of an option if you wanted to work. And so that was pretty much the story. Now, that's the context. Unfortunately, like you said, that's out there. That's the only video footage. I feel like Eddie Graham saved that because he really enjoyed it or something. I don't know why no other footage of this type of workout exists besides that one piece that we've seen pop up.
Let me just say something about Eddie Graham. In terms of, he was larger than life. When I broke in, we've mentioned this before, but he used to take me to these, we would go to like high school gymnasiums where they would have a stage set up and the place would be full of a lot of times of kids. And there were other different venues, a lot of times young adults, or school kids. And what we're always doing, we're anti-drug. Well, we're talking about don't use drugs. Well, right. A lot of people, some of the other people on the stage were the anchors on the sports, on the TV shows. There are 3 major TVs in Tampa, and all 3 of those guys would be there. and usually someone from the city, a mayor or somebody else, and they were all on first name basis with Eddie, treating him like he was one of them. So in terms of my mind, he had this stature that was well above,
Right.
the guy you see in that cruddy little sportatorium, that little seamy room back there where all that horrible things happen. The guy you saw in there was the same guy you saw on the stage talking about, well, don't do drugs, and, who came across like the greatest guy in the world. But, he had that mean streak in him. And, it just came to me, one of the reasons you mentioned Jack, here, relevation here. I always wondered why Eddie lost. He lost Jack, he lost me, he lost Dusty. Now, not for the same reasons, but I'm pretty sure the reason he lost Jack and me was from making us do that stuff. It was just unconscionable of him to take guys. We were trained in amateur wrestling. You mentioned it earlier with Dale Lewis. We were trained not to hurt people.
Right.
If you hurt people, you couldn't wrestle. If you fouled somebody, say you slammed them, you get disqualified. You might not wrestle. Might be allowed to wrestle for, say, a year or two. And then if you do it a second time, you might not be allowed to wrestle amateur ever again, because it's a sport that you've got your hands on people all the time, and you've got them in a position where you can very easily break things: ankles, arms, legs, wrists, necks, if you want to. But so the very, 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 very idea. I saw one punch in all my years in wrestling, and it was a backhand. One guy punched another, was immediately disqualified. Yeah, we have that. I did that for 13 years. So here I come in, and a year or two later, this guy said I'd break his leg. No, just went against everything. And even if I hadn't, if you're a gunsel is someone who will say okay and go do it and maybe enjoy it, but no. And so when Jack was very disillusioned, what Jack Brisco had to pay to become world champion, oh man, I feel bad for him, because it's like you finally earned the great bowl full of celebratory champagne of your career has reached the zenith. You're the world champion, and you look and there's a big turd in the punch bowl, because that's what you had to do. It was what you had to do to get there. Put that turd in there. So Jack was by the time he became world champion, because he got screwed around with the way it was supposed to happen.
Right.
He had to wait, and by the time he got it, it was just so down. It was like a chore. And then of course
disenchanted with it. I know he didn't like to travel. I know you've talked about it, but I've heard it in other aspects as well. Of Jack basically wasn't paid what he should have been paid in many different territories and whatnot. That's why there's a great story out there. He goes and works a tour for Baba in All Japan, and they come to him and say, Jack, we're going to pay you X amount of dollars. It was tens and tens of thousands of dollars to drop the NWA World Title belt to Baba just for a week over there. And Terry Funk is the Funks are the ones bringing the Gaijin in, the foreign talent in. So Terry comes to Jack with this idea. Hey, we're going to have you lose the belt here for a couple days and make all this money. And Jack's all about it. But Terry suggests maybe don't go tell Sam Muchnick and company, because we don't know. Jack, the stand-up guy that he was, says, I can't do that. And he goes and tells Sam Muchnick, guys, I've been offered this much money to drop the belt, and I'm going to go over there and drop the belt. And they say, well, all right, because Sam Muchnick is 3% of everything the world champion makes. Yes. And Jack Brisco comes back from losing that world title on that tour. He wins it back at the end of the tour. He comes back home, and Sam picks him up at the airport. Jack said Sam had never done that before. And he comes in there, and Sam says, all right, where's my 3%? And Jack said, Sam, if you want 3% from the world champion, Baba was the world champion during that. So you got to go get your 3% from Baba. I got paid a flat fee. And so I was so happy when I heard that story to know that Jack finally screwed the promoters back and got at least some of the money coming to him, So I love that story. I love it. Yeah.
Me too. That's I never heard that one. That one, I am so pleased, because I really like Jack, and I respected him, and I felt so bad by the way that his career beat him down emotionally and psychologically. He was like a faded man, at the end, he reached the top, but the price he had to pay, oh my God. It just, it affects your character when you're doing crap like that.
Hey everybody, Gene Jackson here, inviting you to check out the Retro Wrestling Review, where each week I'm joined by some great co-hosts who help me review classic episodes of USWA Championship Wrestling, and right now we are doing week-by-week reviews of 1993. But we don't just do reviews, sometimes we get a chance to interview some of the people who were there and lived it, plus do watch-alongs. It's a lot of fun, so check out new episodes that drop every Wednesday at WrestleCopia.com, and to find links to everything associated to the podcast, you can go to USWApodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron over at Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, Patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive Watch Along series covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
This is Wrestling Nostalgia, the podcast that dives into wrestling history. Hey, wrestling fans, I'm Dave Dynasty, and if you enjoy podcasts that are knowledgeable and history-driven, then Wrestling Nostalgia is for you. With great guests and fun interviews, there are over 200 episodes in our archives. We chat with several first-time guests and often cover topics not discussed on other podcasts. Look up Wrestling Nostalgia on your favorite podcast platform and visit all of our links at linktree/WrestlePod. That is linktr.ee/RASSLEPOD. And remember, wherever you go, whatever you do, be good, be safe, and keep on growing.
So back to Sam Muchnick for a second. We talked in previous episodes about me going to Sam when I first broke in, and I got to see him and his bailiwick, where all his awards. A guy looked like. He was as prominent as you could be. He had awards all over this great big apartment-like office that had 4 or 5 different ante-rooms. You could see them all. There were awards everywhere, hanging on walls, statues, and like things on cabinets or shelves, and the guy, and had a beautiful office, very well appointed, looked like $1 million. Plus, he's the president of the NWA, And then when I come down to the office, whenever, a few times, here's that same guy in Eddie Graham's office, sitting in a chair in front of the desk in front of Eddie, and not being obedient or, not kowtowing, but being basically obligatory or whatever Eddie's got going for him. Mm-hmm. So that also, the reason I'm telling that story is that also raised Eddie Graham's stature in my mind.
Sure, I get it.
What kind of authority he had and what kind of respect he had.
Yeah. And that's, unfortunately, we haven't until this very moment documented that or discussed here on the program that video footage. And so I'm finally glad we got that out of the way, but it couldn't have happened at a better time because while we don't have video footage of this, Ole Anderson paints a hell of a picture. It puts you in a fine light, if I do say so myself. And I wanted to read an excerpt from his book here to you, Bob, in regards to stretching marks and in regards to a story about you stretching marks in front of Ole and his comments. So I wanted to read you a couple lines here from Ole Anderson's book.
Okay.
So in regards to working out with marks is what Ole called it. He said, at first, Gene Anderson, worked out with marks at the behest of old man Crockett Sr. There was no money involved. We just volunteered to work out with them. Gene and I weren't the only two who did that. Guys like Harley Race, Buzz Sawyer, Bob Roop all did the same thing. In fact, before turning pro, Bob wrestled in the '68 Olympics and was the national AAU champion in '69. He had been stretching marks for Eddie Graham, the wrestling promoter in Florida, but quit because Eddie would abuse the guys after Bob finished stretching them. You've talked about that before, Bob. He said, when the mark got out of the ring, Eddie would cold cock the guy. Bob didn't like the fact that Eddie took advantage of people in that fashion, so he left. That was one of the major differences between Bob and me. Bob didn't want to hurt anybody. Bob didn't believe in abusing anybody. I believe in abusing everybody, including Bob, at least verbally. So Ole said, I love crippling people or hurting people, at least at the very least, but he's putting you over here in the sense that he's saying that what you saw in that video footage basically is not, Bob Roop. The context is Ole knew you, Ole worked with you, Ole saw these type of things, and he said Bob didn't want to hurt people. If he did, it was forced to, and he was disgusted by it. But Ole putting himself in the opposite, and he doesn't care, right? He's openly admitting, I enjoyed it. And that's when we get to the story here, and this is good too. You're going to really love this one. So he says, I remember Bob Roop wrestling a heavy-set kid who worked at the hospital as an orderly. Bob had him trapped in the sugar hold. The kid was crying and begging to be turned loose. So I told Bob, don't let the guy go. Break a finger or something, but don't just turn him loose. Bob was really a nice guy, though. He absolutely hated to do that kind of thing, but I loved it. Boy, did I love it. I told Bob, do it. If you don't do it, this guy's going to come back one day and tell everybody that he can beat your fat ass, Bob. He's Ole goes on. He says,
I can hear him saying this.
Yeah. So Ole goes on here. He says, Bob states that I don't think he needs it, Ole. The guy was crying. Oh no, I don't need it. I don't need to have my finger broke. I won't tell nobody. I egged Bob on though. Look at him, Bob. He's a big kid. He's going to tell everybody in town that he kicked your big fat ass all over the ring. You better do something. The kid responds, oh no, Mr. Anderson. I don't have to tell anybody. I don't need a broken finger. I think we can just let him go, Bob Roop repeated. Oh yes, Mr. Roop, I won't say nothing, said the kid. That, by the way, was an example of how I abused Bob. For the record, Bob is one hell of a guy and a good friend, even if he does have a big fat ass.
Oh yeah. They used to have such fun. Ole would get me. We had this office at the Omni. Well, the Atlanta Hawks, the basketball team, played there.
Yeah.
And so they had a dressing room. It was right down, it was like, maybe 30. Their dressing room door was like 30 yards from our office. All you had to do was get out of our office, shut the door, go down the hallway, the first door you came to. In fact, when we ran shows at the Omni, that's where the boys dressed. Ole would find some poor mark that, or some guy would come and he'd want to try out, and Ole would have me go in there. There was an area that was carpeted. It wasn't on that, but it had carpet. So, and I would take these guys, and of course, all I'd do is like get them down immediately and put the sugar hold on them. But what was funny, I mean, it wasn't fun. One time, Ronnie Garvin happened to be there too.
Oh, no.
So they're both in there watching, and what they're talking about. Oh, that had such fun. Look at, always say, look at the fat ass on that Bob Roop. Jesus, a big fat slob. How can he beat anybody? Ronnie was going, yeah, look at the gut too, man. What? That guy couldn't beat anybody. Oh, they have such fun. They go back and forth competing to see who can insult me the worst. Meanwhile, I'm risking my ass because even some guy who can't do anything can inadvertently, without even trying to, poke you in the eye,
Sure,
and damage, and hurt you, or seriously, or hurt you or bite you, or every one of them's a risk. So I'm sitting there listening to all that. A couple of times I had to laugh myself, which made the victim I was with probably curdled his spine because he thought, oh my God, this guy's laughing while he's crippling me. Oh my God, I'm in trouble.
Oh,
but
I got a kick out of that story, and it just happened to have you involved. But I mean, when we look through it though, the gist of it is Ollie's telling the story. Bob didn't want to hurt people. I wanted to hurt everybody. I told him, you better break something up. And we talked about that before with Eddie Graham. The idea of the whole thing was they got to leave here with something wrong with them in order so they can't go tell their friends, yeah, look at me. Right. Here I am back at the bar today and I'm fine. I kicked their ass, or at the very least they couldn't hurt me. And so that was the idea behind it. They got to go home with a broken something or a bruised face or a busted lip, something. And so I guess that was Ollie's idea here too. And I get that at the end of the day, why they're doing that, but couldn't we just not do it to begin with? It's like you're kind of forcing the issue there. But I thought there was something very interesting at the end of that, and where Ollie Anderson referred to you as a friend. It's not very often that Ollie Anderson calls anybody a friend, and he name drops the word friend here with you. And I don't know that we've ever really discussed that. It's not that you thought Ollie was just an acquaintance, but to you, Ollie was always business. So are you just now learning you were actually Ollie's friend, or did you know that all along?
No, I always felt friendship towards him. I mean, the elements of friendship for me are respect is one, trust is another. I respected him and I trusted him to be who he was. Yeah, he was all those things. He was rough trade in a lot of ways. Like I said, we had very similar backgrounds, completely different on our ethnic background. I think he was Polish or Lithuanian or something. He talked about a family that his real name was Rogowski.
Right.
He talked about things. His grandfather hauling shingles up to the roof when he was in his 70s, and stuff like that. And he just came from a completely different background than I did. My dad was a mild-mannered college professor. He weighed about 160 pounds and 5'9". I never saw him do anything really athletic in my whole life. I mean, I was maybe swimming, but he wasn't an athlete. He was a scholar. My size and everything came from my mother's side of the family. Yeah, that was then friends. Yeah. Anyway, let's move on.
Yeah, we'll continue. So you mentioned some of the things you look for in a friendship. And one of those things you just happened to mention was trust. And that's very important because the very next thing I have here in my notes is Ollie listing the names of people he could trust. And it is a very short list, mind you guys. So listen to this here. The people that Ollie Anderson could trust. Here is what he stated in his book. He said, as for people who I felt I could really trust, that list was a lot shorter than friends. I could trust Bob Roop, and I felt the same way about Stan Hansen too. Then Gene Anderson, for sure. So his former partner's lifelong partner, really Gene Anderson, the Andersons, obviously. I would stake my life on Gene, says Ollie. It all boils down to this. I didn't look at people and think I liked them or I didn't like them. For the most part, I just looked at people and considered several factors. Will they work hard? Can they wrestle? Can they make money or not? If a guy wasn't talented, I had to get rid of him. If a guy was talented, but he was a pain in the ass, I might or might not get rid of them. It all depended on the degree of ass pain that I had to put up with to keep them. God, I love this book. Just another. But whenever I fired someone, it was never personal. It was always business. But how about that? Maybe there's a couple other he left out, but he names 3 people in the entire wrestling industry that he trusted. Stan Hansen, Gene Anderson, which makes absolute sense, and you, Bob. How do you feel about being in that close company?
Well, I you know what? I feel really, really good about it. I tell you why, because I always felt like an outlier in the wrestling business because of my value system. So not that I'm better or anybody else, but my values in terms of like what was important. And the idea about hurting people and all that, if pro wrestling had been for real, I never would have gone into it because, first of all, I didn't want to get hurt. Go out there and where people can legally punch you and all that? No, you out of your mind. The idea that of being able to trust someone in the wrestling business was something I was always looking for because we talked in the past about people who, it wasn't everybody that you couldn't trust, but there was always someone who was going to, if they could gain any kind of advantage from it. And some of them times it wasn't to get advantage. Sometimes it was just to get personal pleasure out of screwing somebody around. People weren't gaining anything from it really. So, yeah, well, that's a nice feeling because again, it's coming from someone who was a mover and shaker in the business and who, made a name for himself without doing anything totally really outrageous. He was a main event wrestler most of his career, but he wasn't a Dusty Rhodes or, Hulk Hogan or Ric Flair or whatever. He was, in terms of his notoriety. Now, in terms of money making, Hulk Hogan probably did better, but only made a lot of money. I always admired him and respected him for that, but I'm flattered. I'm flattered that he considered me a friend. I certainly liked him and respected him again. Oh, I know I forgot what I was going to say a minute ago. Ole would always get rid of people in the most abrupt, curt, short way that he could. You're some big guy comes and, I remember a story, his great big 6'6", 400-pound lumberjack type guy who had the lumberjack clothes on. Ole, he came and wanted to try it. Ole had him he went to get in the ring and he tripped getting in the ring. He said, "Get your big fat ass out of here, you motherfucker, before I kill you." And I thought, gee, that was a little harsher. But when you think about it, he was busy. I mentioned it earlier in some other situation. He was at the office when I got there, and he had 6 kids at home and a wife at home.
Right.
And yet he was at the office when I got there, and he was there when I left. Now, I had to go to the show. He could go home at night, that is. But no, he didn't go home every night. I mean, some weeks he went out on tour, at least for 2 or 3 days he'd fly in. So he was giving up a lot, too. He had a family with 6 kids, and, he's gone all another during the school year. Of course, they're in school. But it ended up, eventually he ended up getting divorced and, losing some of his fortune that way. But there's a cost for everything you do. But I respected the fact that he was willing to put in the time and the effort, and the fact that he didn't mince words. He would say it. If people didn't like it, we'll do something about it.
As I was going through the book, just randomly, I would come across all these different ways he fired people, and they are absolutely hilarious. It's not funny that people lost their jobs, but just the way he went about doing it. There was even a fun story in there in regards to David Schultz, Dr. D. David Schultz here in the early 80s. He said one Christmas holiday season, David Schultz asked if he could come. He's going to be in the area. Can he come in and work for a week? And Ole booked him. And he no-showed. The very next year, Schultz calls him again, asks to get booked for a week or two. And so Ole said, sure, come on in. And David Schultz shows up, and Ole says, well, you're not booked. He goes, what are you talking about? He goes, well, now we're even. What are you talking about? Well, last year I booked you, and you no-showed. Now you showed up, and I didn't book you, so now we're even. And so I got a kick out of that. And so it's funny the way Ole would just handle people, or, various other stories, how you talked to how abrupt he would just fire people. And many times, admittedly, even in the book, he says, I did hire him back a week later or something like that, but he wasn't going to play anybody's politics. If he heard somebody was talking shit behind his back, they weren't happy. Well, you're not happy with $1,800? How about $0? And then they would be on their way. Yeah. So now we don't have a problem anymore. If you guys are that hot of a commodity, go get paid somewhere else more. I don't want to hold you up here. That's a hell of a business guy, really, at the end of the day. People might look at that and go, what an asshole. Well, if you have that big of a problem, go solve it.
Well, I got to see, I didn't see actually how the firing went, but my first day of working, that I worked in the office with Ole, I can't remember if I offered to help him with the book or if he asked me. He knew I had been a booker. So he said, why don't you come in sit down. We'll sit down and see if we can work together. So the first day I came in, now he had an office, and then outside his office, he had a door that shut. Was like an ante room, and there was another little room on the other side of it. And Louise Bennett was in there as a secretary, as a company secretary. Mm-hmm. And at the first day I was there, Les Thatcher and Ronnie West, the referee, I don't know what Thatcher did, but Ronnie West was the referee. They were on that outside area. I never saw them go in the office the one day that I was there with them. Well, I was trying to work that day. Ole gave me some kind of assignment, book the undercard on 4 or 5 towns. So I'm working on that. And these guys are fucking, these guys won't ever shut up. They're talking about this and that. And what they're talking about is how fucked up Ole is. Pardon my language, but how screwed up Ole is with his booking and all this. And I'm listening to that. Now the door to his office is shut. I'm listening to that. And I'm thinking, well, why are you guys working here? If you're so upset with it, why give you notice or something? Well, they wouldn't let me get any work done. So by the middle of the second day, and it was still going on, I was in Ole's office, and I left. And for some reason, I don't know, I'm sure it was an accident, I left the door open a little bit. Those guys started talking again about, they were talking about his booking, too. They didn't agree with his booking. And so, blah, 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 blah. The next morning when I came to work, I was pulling in the Omni parking lot in the back. There's these turnstiles you go through, where you have to put in a ticket and all that. Mm-hmm. And as I was going in, Les Thatcher and Ronnie West were coming out. And it's in the morning. The workday has just started, and they're leaving. Uh-huh. So, yeah, So I got in there. I asked Louise. I said, "What happened to Ronnie and Les?" She said, "Oh, they fired him." I said, "Oh, really?" She said, "Why?" She said, "I don't know. I'm not sure." So I went in and I said, "Hey, what's going on?" He said, "Well," he said, "I had to get rid of Thatcher and Ronnie." He said, "Ronnie, your $1,800 reminded me of this," because he said, well, last time we worked in Ohio, Ronnie West went on for a week. He made $1,800 as a referee. He made $1,800, and he's going to badmouth me and give me crap about anything about my booking. Yeah. Oh, well, guess what? Now he's making nothing. And that's what that story reminded me of. I'm sure I left that door open by accident, but quite frankly, I couldn't get any work done with those guys there. Once they were gone, it was much quieter. Freddie Freeman would come in, and Mike, he called himself Mike Holder. I was endearing. I thought that was kind of neat. He never took himself too seriously. Yeah, and it was a nice little, Luis and Ole and I had a nice little threesome there. And I mean that, of course, in the most decent possible way. But we worked together. We worked together effectively, and we went through some things like, Fire and Gore and Solely is one. We'll get into that down the road, and dealing with Tony Atlas going crazy. We get into that down the road too. Yeah, Ole was one of the guys I met in the business that I remember with completely fond memories. True, he could be sadistic. I never saw him hurt anybody, but the fact that he wanted to or whatever, I saw him verbally beat up people. But you know what? He would. I told a story about with the Samoans and the different, people were. The guy had guts. He had a lot of. He was fine. He didn't go around and say, "Well, I hear you guys are upset." No, it's who you are. Am I fighting you both at the same time or one at a time? Who's first? I admire shit like that. I mean, I couldn't do it. I would have to go in and maybe if I was going to fight both of them, start out by hitting one of them with a baseball bat.
Well, it took decades, to find out these things. I'm sure Ole didn't come up to you and go, "Bob, I consider you a friend. Bob, I really trust you. Bob, you did great with this part of the business." He showed you that by simply employing you and working alongside you and treating you as a fellow employee or whatever you want to call it here. And so to come out this many decades later, the book comes out and he openly admits some of the things that you did for him here in the book that I'm sure he wasn't putting over to you in person. Like, we always, you have a job and sometimes a lot of the places you work will have that annual sit down with you and kind of tell you what you're doing right or what you're doing wrong, what they like out of you. Maybe they give you a raise, et cetera, et cetera. I'm assuming Ole didn't really sit down with people and do that, but I did.
No.
I did notice this in the book, so I wanted to mention this too because it's something else that Ole noticed from your time working for him. He said, Bob Roop probably did more for me than I was ever aware of. Bob would go out with those guys. I did not. Bob spent a lot of time acting as a babysitter to Buzz Sawyer. I know he babysat the Iron Sheik too. Not that I hired Bob to be a babysitter, but I think he took his job to a level that I hadn't anticipated. He might have had a more difficult job than I ever knew. So we'll talk a little bit about here. You remember being a babysitter for some of these? I know we've told stories about Sheiky Baby and even Buzz Sawyer, you having to kind of grab him, collect him, and pour him into the back seat of a car once upon a time.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any other stories about either one of those guys right now, or if they come along as we continue to talk here over the next several episodes. But tell me about your time working for Ole, not as a wrestler, but in that agent spot. Ole said he didn't expect you to be a babysitter, but you kind of just took an initiative, so to speak, and said, well, this is a business and this is what needs to be done. This guy needs to get from A to B, and I'm going to put myself in the position to make sure that happens.
Right. The idea, the bottom line is the show has to go on. That's the standard in show business. The show must go on. And whatever it takes to get it to go on is what you're going to do. And if that means going and find Buzz Sawyer passed out from a night of doing cocaine and booze and whatever else, and probably a handful of dollars to be able to go to sleep.
Sleep, right.
And so it's the middle of the day, it's time to leave, and he's passed out, unable to, make sure he's not dead. And instead of, you can't get him awake, get somebody to help you carry him to a car, load him in the back seat and drive him to a town, and hope that he sleeps it off by the time you get there.
Right.
And even if you see if he can work, maybe he can. If he can, at least have him there where you at least show that you say he got
he's
hurt.
In the building, right? Yeah.
Yeah, at least he's there, and the people at least might believe that, but they have a much better chance of believing it than if he's not there. Yeah, and those are just things that had to be done. Now they were Buzz Sawyer. Now Sheik and I was completely different. I don't want to put Buzz Sawyer and Khosrow Vazari in the same breath because Sheik was someone he was a friend for one thing. I liked him, I admired him. He was a great amateur wrestler, and what a character! He was a lot of fun on the road. Babysitting him, I roamed with him on the road, but I was doing some of the things he was doing. He always had a little handbag full of drugs, and I want to say to him, it wouldn't be anything more lethal or toxic than like maybe Ambien for sleeping pills. You could take a couple of Ambien and a beer and get a little high going, And after the matches, it was always nice to have a way to come down to where you could go to sleep before 3 o'clock in the morning. So, and that's just my excuse. I enjoyed getting mellow. I never took speed. If I did, I never took it again because I didn't enjoy being, like your body's out of control. You're racing, you can't control it with your mind. Whereas if you're just mellowed out, that's okay as long as you don't do it, get too mellow or you're passing out in the bar or something. But Khosrow didn't take a whole lot of babysitting. Now some of the great stories were him and Ole. God, they were fun in the dressing room. Khosrow would always be getting on him, calling him names and telling him he was
That's right.
I'm third in the world. You're a punk. You're no wrestler.
Just Zabroni.
Yeah. You talk about it. I think Ole came around just because he was great, or had him around just because he was great in the dressing room.
Yeah.
The guys were all, when Khosrow and Ole wasn't always in the dressing room, but when the two of them were there, it was always a good time because Khosrow was always screw with him. And he would do something. Khosrow was setting himself up. He knew Ole was going to do something horrible to him, like take a key or something and write his initials on Khosrow's bald head, something like that. But now Buzz was completely different. He wasn't anything funny at all about Buzz. But again, that was part of the job. One time in Atlanta, I got a phone call that from the bar where the boys all went, that there was a guy there waiting to he was going to stab. He had a cane with a sword in it. He was going to stab Buzz. Buzz had called him a cripple or something. The guy had a bad leg, congenital, I think. He was born with it. And Buzz was a heel, so he was giving him shit about. But I mean, you don't do that in public. And anyway, he did it in the bar. This guy was waiting for him. He was going to wait till he went out, and he was going to stab him. I don't know if he's going to stab him to kill him, or he's just going to maybe stab him in the leg. But that wasn't the point. Well, anyway, I was home for the night, and I had to come down there. My wife was over there by that time. I had to come down to the bar and keep an eye on him just to make. I walked him out of there, and the guy was waiting for him. But with me there to kind of do escort duty, I managed to get him to a car. Now, Buzz is gone. Rest in peace, Buzz. But here's an example of Buzz. And Ole had a Cadillac that he had redone. It was an older one, like 10 or 15 years old. It was immaculate. I mean, it's just beautiful. And Buzz, for some reason, wrecked his car or something, and he needed a car. So Ole sold him the car for, I don't know, next to nothing, cost, whatever. Within a week, that car looked like it had been actually something you pulled out of a junkyard and got running. It had dents in it. It was filthy inside. There was food all over the floor, spilled potato chips, beer. I mean, it just totally, he didn't ruin it. But even if you had taken it and had it detailed, it wasn't going to get anywhere near the condition it had been in when Buzz got it. He had it a week. He was just, I don't know, a mess in action. He was just a walking mess. There was somebody.
He didn't have too many people that had a lot of kind words to say about him.
Well, he didn't. He acted like he acted like he wanted you to hate him. He was always so. He was so disrespectful to me. I mean, he never called me names or anything, but he would just. He didn't want to do finishes, and he didn't like to finish. It was just, I think, looking back, I think it was his way of trying to show that he had some clout. He could refuse. This was Ole's finish I was giving him, like on the road. Well, even in Atlanta, in the Georgia territory, say we're in Columbus,
right?
And it's Ole's finish. That's what Ole finish Ole told me to have him do. I gave him to him, and he said, I'm not doing that one. I said, that's what Ole wants you to do. I'm not doing it. So I'd have to go call Ole. And then Ole say, well, get him on the line. Then I have to go get Buzz to come to the phone. He wouldn't come with me. Then I have to go get Buzz and say, Ole wants you to call him. I mean, that happens twice a week. First of all, it undermined my authority in the dressing room by doing that crap. But, he was one of our main event guys, and he was drawing money. I can't give it where it's due. Why would you put up with anybody who didn't? If a guy did draw money. Now, Ole had a fond spot in his heart for some reason for Buzz. I don't know why, but he did. He just felt for the guy, for some reason. And so he never had me crack down on him or anything, but boy, what a pain in the butt. It made going to work, the idea of going to work and being on the road all week with the guy, it made it unpleasant because I knew I was going to have a problem every night. That's no fun. Now, Cosgrove again was the exact opposite. He was a lot of fun. We had a lot of laughs together, and I got some stories we'll get into down the road, and we might as well wait till we get to the time, like the time slot for it. But Buzz definitely needed a lot of babysitting. I still remember we had to go to Knoxville from Atlanta, and I don't remember, it's a couple 100 miles at least. And I had to load him into the back seat of he said he was sick. He could walk, but he said he was sick. And I had to load him. He laid in the back seat of my Cadillac and I drove him to Atlanta. And when the match came, I don't remember who, maybe Matt Bourne or somebody went out and got him and brought him in so the fans could see him and, say he was sick and all that. And he certainly looked sick. He was. He'd been doing coke and crap all night long. And then I had to take him back home. So he got back in the back seat and laid down. I drove him back to Atlanta. He took him to his place and get out. Yeah, that's not my idea. Just me and him. I said, it's not my idea of a good time, way above the Call of Duty. But you know what? that's what it took for the show to go on. That's what I had to do. So I'm glad that Ole appreciated it. It makes me feel good to know that.
Well, we talked a lot about Buzz and his issues, and Iron Sheik, he had some issues, although it was a very different situation with Sheiky Baby, but there were a lot of guys. It was very prevalent in the early 80s, the cocaine and everything really coming in at that point in time. And Ole he has a whole chapter on it in his book, and we'll get into a lot of that on the next episode because he credits you, whether you want to take it or not, for being the one that opened his eyes to the prevalent drug use in the wrestling business. He admitted to being ignorant to it. He didn't realize so many guys were doing what they were doing, and it was you who turned him on to that, and you were kind of like the guy who went around for him, and you didn't really rat people out necessarily, but you would tell Ole what to look for, and Ole began to find that, dear God, he made a couple of jokes here in the chapter about, if I fired everybody that was on drugs, the only people left would be me and Bob Roop, and I'm not so sure about Bob Roop. Just kidding, Bob.
Yeah, no, he wouldn't. I mean, I wasn't perfect. I mean, I got to be on the road with all this crap, too. How do you think I'm supposed to come down? I didn't want to be a flaming alcoholic, drink a half gallon of rum every night. So I used some chemical help myself. I admitted earlier, I like being mellowed out. And after being in a dressing room with having that kind of crap of Buzz Sawyer, and we'll get to this down the road, or maybe we had a match where Buzz and Brett, his brother Brett, Buzz was threatening to go out in the ring and shoot with the Road Warriors. Yeah, when you go through crap like that, after the match is over, you want to be able to come down before 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
So
can't say that I blame you there. So, because we're already kind of deep in the episode, I just want to tell one story here from the book, and then we'll close up this week in regards to some of the drinking and the drugs and et cetera. And so just in a preface here, guys, this is actually a story Ole tells about Wildfire Tommy Rich. It seems like maybe this happened more often than I realized, but this seems like something you might remember, Bob. So I want to go into this story. And Tommy Rich, also part of the WrestleCopia podcast network, along with Doug Gilbert and the host Gene Jackson over there on Dangerous Conversations podcast. But Ole talking about Tommy here, when boys will be boys. Somebody says something about, Ole says, for instance, we had more car wrecks. Once the drinking and drugs became more prevalent, we used to provide the guys with cars, usually a Lincoln, 4 guys to a car. One night, while I was driving back to Columbus from Cleveland, Ohio, we saw a car upside down in the median. When I realized it was a Lincoln, I thought, oh my God, don't let it be one of our guys. It was Tommy Rich and 3 other guys. The cops said, listen, we have to arrest him. He's been drinking or using drugs. It has to be one or the other or both. Ole said, as a favor to me, could you please just arrest him for drunk? They agreed. So Ole says he knew a local attorney. She set things up and they agreed to take the case. He think he paid $1,500, maybe $2,000. And he says, see what you guys can do. Well, the attorneys did one hell of a job, said Ole. We not only avoided drug charges, but Tommy got out of the drunk charge as well. Ole goes on to say that through time, Tommy would say, I wasn't on drugs. Tommy would say, I wasn't drinking. And eventually Tommy wouldn't even own up to the fact that the accident ever happened. But Ole says he still, at this point when he wrote the book, he still had the police report. So he had proof that it had happened. So, but I just wanted to go back. It seems like something you might remember. A car flipped over on the side of the road, or in the median, if you will. Tommy Rich and some of the other guys. I don't know if you remember the story, if you remember some of the other guys that were in the car. Just anything about this ring a bell?
Yeah, it rings the Liberty Bell and it cracks it all the way through. It's not just one side anymore. Oh my God. Yeah, Tommy, see, in Michigan, we were talking earlier in the program about Ole expanding from Columbus to the rest of Ohio. Mm-hmm. He also went into Michigan. He did Bay City and Grand Rapids, and also some towns in West Virginia, I think Wheeling and
Huntington.
Maybe Charleston. Huntington, yeah, that rings a bell. So the week that we would go, where we'd go to Michigan, we only worked 2 nights there. So the other 3 nights would be in Ohio somewhere, or maybe West Virginia, I don't know. In Michigan, they had a athletic commission. So you had to get checked by a doctor before you could wrestle. And we told a story earlier about Ole threatening to shut the show down in Grand Rapids because the commissioner wasn't going to let Ivan Koloff wrestle. But, the doctors would come and check the guys. I think they take their pulse, or I don't know if they listen to their heart or not. But it's just they wouldn't go through the wait a minute. They would go through the actual doing it. It wasn't just sham. They would actually do it. But the athletic commission got 10% of the gate. You got a $30,000 house. They're making $3,000 for. That's a nice house call, isn't it? $3,000. So the boys would always give them the story that hey Doc, I can't sleep. I'm so blah blah blah, and they get downers or hey Doc, I'm to get so worn out. I got to drive 2,000 miles a week. Anything you give me to perk me up, and they'd get uppers. And the doctors would write them scripts for like 100 of them. And Tommy was real good at getting those. And Tommy liked to do downers and drink. So I saw him in one match. And when you talked about Brad Armstrong earlier, it reminded me of it because Brad was his partner and against the Road Warriors in Cincinnati in an afternoon show. Show started at 1 o'clock. And by the time Tommy was ready to go on, it was probably 2:30, 2:45. And he showed up just, got poured into the room. I mean, he made it on his own, but he was, you could tell. And for some reason, I don't know why, I let him work. And he went out there and he managed to get up on the corner of the ring, a tag team match, him and Brad. And Brad got out there, and for some reason, the Road Warriors are still great. And the Road Warriors did a thing, where they got Brad, and they fought on their side of the ring, and they fought Brad all the way around to where Brad is fighting the Road Warriors. He's going from one to the other, punching them. And Tommy's on the apron about 3 or 4 feet away, and he's just hanging on the rope and just sitting there watching them. He's not capable of even getting down and helping helping his partners getting the dog shit made out of him by the Road Warriors. And here, Rich is too screwed up to even get. And it killed. It really hurt. I'm not saying it killed the town. It killed Tommy Rich in that town because they say, well, why aren't you helping him? And so, was it a problem? Is that not a problem? If you're me, the guy watching the show, who's running the show, yes, it's a serious problem.
Right.
But Tommy was a draw. And about the car, Ole thought he was going to have to pay for it. I think the guy who running the cars was self-insured, and because Tommy he had provided his own insurance, because Tommy had a DUI for the accident, the guy was charging Ole for the car, and it was I think $24,000, maybe 34, but whatever, it was some serious money. Ole was going to charge. Tommy had some property that he had bought, and he was going to. The deal was, I'm working in the office with Ole. I'm hearing this every day. We're talking about stuff like this, and Ole was going to have Tommy sell the property to pay him for the paying for the car. Mm-hmm. So, and then what happened was, that turned out the DUI, the breathalyzer or whatever, the blood test, whatever they did, came back negative. And the part you said about them not testing for drugs, that's the reason they got away with it. Because Tommy was downed out, but he only had a beer or two, so he didn't test positive. He probably had six Ambien or something. I mean, he was only about 50 miles from the town he was leaving. He was already so screwed up. He rolled the car. Well, he's lucky. He had a bunch of guys with him. He's lucky he didn't kill anybody.
Yeah.
So,
and the story, as Ole tells it here, it wasn't so much to put an attack on Tommy. It was using Tommy in this specific instance as a way to kind of show how things just were during this time period. And I was just going to read another thing here he says about it, and we'll close up. He said, Tommy denied that he had taken drugs or that he had been drunk. Eventually, he didn't remember being in the accident. That was how messed up he was. Instead of saying, thank you for getting me out of the drug charge, which it would have been, and thank you for getting me out of the drunk charge, which it should have been, he wouldn't even acknowledge it. I wasn't guilty of anything. I wasn't even in that accident. Ole stated that I still have a copy of the police report from that accident that Tommy, quote unquote, wasn't in. So he says Tommy didn't learn anything from the incident. He went right along the same path he had been following before the accident. And this is where he kind of morphs it into not being about Tommy, but about just a lot of the talent at the time. He said, That kind of thing happened several times. If the guys didn't wreck the cars, they would trash them. It got so bad that several rental agencies told me that they didn't want our business anymore.
Yep.
And that was, so Ole, we didn't hear tell of that in the territory days. Somebody giving you rental cars to drive. You guys were trying to find your own vehicles and transportation and riding together and trying to save a buck and gas. And I heard some of the job guys or the underneath guys would even pack sandwiches and things and sell them to some of the other wrestlers on the road trips just to make a couple extra bucks because they weren't getting paid what the higher up talent was getting paid. And so you hear all these things, and then here's Ole getting everyone rental cars. Now you had to ride 4 deep, but that sounds fair to me. And these guys couldn't even be respectful to the property.
Yeah, well, not just getting rental cars, but getting Lincolns. Ole went, he could have gotten just, some big economy car, but not, half the cost of a Lincoln. But he wanted the guys to we're on the road all week. He wanted the guys to be in luxurious. They're roomy cars. The big Lincolns are nice. Yeah. They're soft. They're plush. And also, you look good coming and leaving. If people watch you drive in, to the arena, or as leaving, if they watch you while you're leaving in a nice, you look like wrestlers are all supposed to be millionaires. You look like you're, as a result of that deal, we got where we were running from Alamo or somebody, just, on a week-by-week basis. Mm-hmm. So, typical wrestler, you got a great deal. Let's see if we can figure out some way to screw it up. As far as my telling Ole about drugs, the way it transpired was that he would go talk to guys and he would come to me. And Tommy Rich was the one in question. He came to me in Cleveland. He came to me and he said, "What's wrong with Rich?" And I said, look, I'm conflicted here. I can't really talk to you about some of the things that go on the road without feeling like a stooge. Even though I work for you, I got to live with these guys. So here's the deal. I know all about drugs. If you think a guy's doing drugs and you want to know, if you ask me, I'll tell you. That was my deal with Ole. I'm not going to come to you about it, but if you ask me, if you ask me, I mean, I don't mean in general. You're not going to ask me about, well, is so-and-so doing it. But if you see something at a show that you got a question about if the guy's doing drugs, come and ask me. I'll tell you. So he asked me about Tommy. I told him he's doing downers. No, Ole didn't know anything about that. He never used any drugs in his life. I don't know if he even used aspirin when he had a broken arm.
Well, maybe if he was going to gig that night. They say that thins the blood a little, right?
That's true. Or if he's going to get sliced that night.
Well, we're going to get deeper into the whole drug usage thing here because Ole's got a whole, chapter on that situation. So we're going to talk a lot more about that next time. And I want to get into more things, including some of the business he was doing in some of the towns, the Ohio towns, and how profitable they were, why he moved away from some of the cities in Georgia. We'll talk about how you guys did the loop from Georgia up to Ohio into Michigan. We're going to talk about a whole lot of that next time around. I did pull that from his book already. Also, some fun stories about random firings that Ole talks about that they happened while you were there. So we're going to pick your brain, see if you remember any of those. And so there's a lot more to get into. We haven't even gotten into your time in the ring. Well, there's more on the Road Warriors still to come. We haven't talked about, we barely scratched the surface really of Georgia here this week. No. So, just to get things going, I love that. Your memories, 100% here. We're totally focused, and everything I've asked you, oh yeah, I remember this. In fact, you told the story of Les Thatcher and Ronnie West, which I also have in my notes, and you basically tell it verbatim to the way Ole remembers it, except for the point where somebody might have left the door open. He did overhear some things which led to their firing. You even got the $1,800 part right. So I am excited to continue on this story into Georgia Championship Wrestling, and you've boosted my energy for the day. I'll probably go crash after this, Bob, but I want to thank you for bringing me back alive again, if only for 90 minutes, 2 hours, whatever it's been.
Oh, well, thank you, Ray. This is a real pleasure for me too. These memories are not all pleasant, but they, in a way, they are too, because I'm not traumatized by them anymore. If I was at the time, and it's fun to remember. And I tell you something else. I want to thank you for sharing Ole's regard for me, because one thing I want to add, when we went to Mobile, Ole and I would sit next to each other they had tables you could sit at in this building they had where the guys all got together. there was a room, there was a big, like a barn, not a barn, but a great big building. It had room for maybe 20 tables, like picnic tables, and they would have 3, like rows of 3, and Ole and I and Ronnie Garvin and Sandy Scott and whoever happened to be there, that Tim Woods when he was still with us, we'd all sit together and and tell stories and whatever. But after the show was over, Ole and I would usually go and have, when we got back to the motel, we'd go and have, he'd get something to eat, or I'd go to his room when he was less and less able to get around. I'd go to his room, and we spend the night shooting the crap and just visiting. And so those are heady days for me too. I look back on that with fond memories, and I thank you for getting into this aspect of things, Ray. I mean, I'm grateful for everything we've done together, but this part is really meaningful, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's fun times, great memories, and it's only episode 1 in regards to the Georgia territory. Like, we've got 100 more to go, so I can't wait to see where we pop up week to week moving forward. Hopefully everybody enjoyed it. I do apologize again if I sound a little run down, but I feel like you energized me, Bob, as we got going here, so I really appreciate that. I'll thank you and your big fat ass for doing that for me here this week on the program.
It helps you're dealing with an 82-year-old geezer with a big fat ass. Makes you feel you should look at yourself. You go, I don't feel that great, but man, I look a hell of a lot better than that damn Bob Roop does.
Well, we'll be back next week. We'll continue on this Georgia journey. So much to get into. Endless talent comes through here, especially because it's cable TV. Everybody wants on TV. Everybody wants on cable. They want that national exposure. Oh yeah. So we're going to cover a ton of talent and a lot more stories here from Ole's book, shoot interviews, and beyond. So I want to thank you so much for this, Bob. Looking forward to doing this more again next week.
I want to thank you again, Ray, but I want to thank our listeners out there. Thank you very much for being there for us, and we look forward to. I hope you have a good week, and I hope you have a good rest of your life. But I hope everything goes well, and we'll look forward to having you listen to us again next week.
Alrighty, that's going to wrap it up here this week. I want to thank everybody who tuned in to these bonus episodes of Regional Wrestling. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode as we continue on that journey through 1977 Memphis, the early 80s in the LaBelle territory there in LA. No doubt Gene Jackson going to be back to continue on Memphis 1985. We're upstarting. More great deep dives into the territories of Chicago and St. Louis. All sorts of things going on right now at Regional Wrestling, and not too far away, I'm sure Jamie Ward chomping at the bit to return with 1982 in Georgia. So lots to be had here on the program. Stay tuned. I want to thank everybody again for tuning in to these bonus editions, and we'll see you next week right here on the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories.